What's up guys, today I'm going to be going over the best console settings in Fortnite. Now this video is going to be a general overview of pretty much all the major settings in Fortnite, whether that be sensitivity, dead zone settings, or controller binds. I just wanted to make an updated video about pretty much all the important console settings that there is and give a pretty good explanation on what these settings do and why they're important. I don't want to give you guys just a template to follow and just not know why you're running these certain settings. So I'm going to play a couple of clips from my older videos that I go more into depth with these settings and explain it really well. But for the most part, it's going to be me talking and saying which settings are best. There's only going to be a couple of clips from my older videos just because I go much more into detail with these settings. So with that being said, we're going to go into the first and one of the most important settings, which is your sensitivity. As you can see, my X and Y sensitivities are pretty high. And the reason for this is when Fortnite first came out, there wasn't a building sensitivity, so if you wanted to build fast, you would need a fast X and Y sensitivity. But once they added that building sensitivity update into console Fortnite, there really is no need to have a super fast sensitivity. I feel like you should always try and find a sensitivity that's comfortable, and the way you want to do that is you honestly just need to mess around with your sensitivity settings until you find one that fits. Now I know this isn't a direct answer on which sensitivity you should use, but the thing is you shouldn't have a direct answer on which sensitivity is right for you. You can use someone's sensitivity as like an outline or like a template to follow, but that's all you should use it for. You should never completely copy them just because they're a good player. Now I still wouldn't have any sensitivity less than 3. That goes for both the X and Y axes. You'll see that I'm not talking about them separately anymore because there's really no need to have them as separate numbers. The only reason that I have these as separate numbers is because I've been using the same sensitivity since the early seasons of Fortnite. And the reason why they're so high is because I naturally play on high sensitivity on almost every game I play. Now these next two sensitivities that we're going to be going over is somewhat important, but just not as important as your X and Y sensitivity, and that's your targeting sensitivity and your scope sensitivity. I have these very close to default, if not the default number, and the reason for that is because I've always been used to it. But the thing is, if you're over tracking an enemy, which means when you aim down sights and you feel like your crosshair is moving way too fast, you're going to need to lower your targeting or scope sensitivity. Now if it's the other way around and you're moving too slow, you need to increase these sensitivities. Now make sure you don't increase them or decrease them too much. Keep them around the default numbers just because you're going to want to make slight adjustments. Now this next setting is the reason why I said you shouldn't have to worry about your X and Y sensitivity as much anymore. And that setting is the controller building sensitivity. And the thing is, if you have a very low sensitivity, I would crank this up all the way almost to maximum. And what I consider to be a low sensitivity is any X or Y value that's less than 6. Now again, this is another sensitivity you're going to need to mess around with just because it's really important, because it's your building sensitivity. And if you have a higher sensitivity, say around 8 or 9 like me, feel free to copy my building sensitivity just because I've messed around with this a lot and I felt like this was the most comfortable and anything on top of this was a little bit too extra. Now if you feel like you can use a building sensitivity faster than this, then by all means go ahead and increase your number. But moving on to the next settings, you can pause the video and look through each setting if you want to, but I'm going to go over the most important settings and the ones you're just going to want to make sure you have off or on. You're going to want to have sprint by default on. This should go for all controller players to have it on at this point. But especially if you want to copy down my keybinds that I'm going to show later in the video, you're going to need to turn this on. And the reason for that is because I use the left click, which is the sprint button, as my edit button. And I'll go more into detail about it once I get to the controller keybinds. But for now, just know that you need sprint by default on. Next, you're going to want to make sure you have edit mode aim assist off. I know a lot of players that don't have this off. And the thing is, it keeps a really magnetic feel while you edit. And it's a very big disadvantage. I don't know why people don't turn this off. Just make sure that the setting of edit mode aim assist is off. Next is a setting that's kind of hidden in the settings, and that's Builder Pro build immediately. And the reason why a lot of people don't have this on is either because they never got used to it and just didn't like it, or they just didn't know that this setting existed. But the thing is, you need to have this setting on. It's a major disadvantage if you don't have it on. And the reason for that is this setting pretty much just makes it so whenever you click a structure, whether it be your ramp, wall, or your floor, it will place it automatically rather than you having to look at whatever structure it is you're about to build and then place it. Now finally, we're on to the keybinds of the controller. Now this is probably the most important one, and this is the one where you can get most creative with, meaning you could have whatever you want as your edit button. That's probably going to be the number one thing you're going to change around your controller if you haven't changed it yet. And if you want a more complete explanation on what keybinds are the best, you can look at my old video that goes over keybinds. It goes more into detail, and it's still up to date in my opinion with the standards of what people use as their edit button. But for time reasons, I'm going to go over what I use as my edit button and the reason why I use it. So I'm just going to play a clip from my old video that shows how to get these keybinds. So with that being said, my first and my most favorable custom keybind is the one where you replace your left click button, the one you'd use to sprint, as your edit button. To do this, what you're first going to want to do is go to your main settings, the one that's under the game tab, and scroll down till you see sprint by default and make sure that's checked on. Next, you're going to want to go to the settings that have the custom keybinds and make sure you're already switched to the Builder Pro layout. Next, you're going to want to go to your B or circle button, whatever one has the switch mode / edit key on it. You're just going to want to change that to switch mode by itself. You don't want to be accidentally pressing circle to edit. You want to make sure that's completely gone. You don't want to have that there anymore. The last thing you're going to need to do is switch your left thumbstick to edit mode. And this configuration, in my opinion, is the best editing configuration. Now that the settings are more updated, there are clearly more tabs, but the only things that you have to worry about are the build controls and the combat controls. Just make sure your circle or B button is switch mode by itself, and make sure your left click is your edit button. Now finally, we have the dead zone settings, and I made a whole video about dead zone settings, so I'm not going to completely explain this. But just make sure you have a dead zone setting between 0.8 and 0.10 if you're on console. You don't want anything more than that. The only reason you'd want a dead zone setting higher than that is if you have a drifting problem with your controller. And the way you check that is you make your dead zone setting as small as possible. And if your controller naturally drifts, that means you have a drifting problem clearly. But if you don't, just pick the numbers between 0.8 and 0.10. That's all the major settings. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're new.